Good morning, everybody, and very warm welcome to this morning's joint session of GSF and SEESOX, which is entitled, After Turkey's Elections, a Change of Direction or More of the Same, ? We like the question marks because they introduce, we hope, an element of debate into our discussions. This year marks the 10th anniversary of our collaboration with Southeastern European Studies at Oxford, which is commonly known as SEESOX, and I'm delighted to welcome them back to GSF again. The first event which we co-hosted was actually back in 2013 and was entitled Southeast Europe, Revisiting Convergence, Diagnosis and Prognosis. Since then, members of SEESOX have come to GSF every year to present their latest research and their analysis of the geopolitics of Southeastern Europe, which the programme covers. Today's event is no different. It builds on the work SEESOX has done in analysing the impact of last month's Turkish election results, which included a seminar earlier this month in Oxford, which was called Turkey's General Elections 2023, What Next? That seminar looked at the question now facing Turkey and the wider world of what President Erdogan will do next. And we're going to cover much of the same ground again today, I'm delighted to say. But before turning to the substance of today's event, I wanted to take this opportunity to reiterate what I said last year, that this has been a most fruitful and productive collaboration over the years, and I'm very proud of what we and SEESOX have achieved together. I'm now going to ask Sir David Madden to introduce today's event and our panel of speakers in more detail, and to give some background on the inspiration behind it. And he will also chair the Q&A. David, as many of you know, is a former ambassador to Greece and High Commissioner to Cyprus, and he's a senior member and distinguished friend of St Antony's College at the University of Oxford. He's also, as I've said, a great friend of GSF as well. David, over to you, and to the highly topical subject of today's presentations, after Turkey's elections, a change of direction, or more of the same, ? David.
Michael, thank you very much indeed. And I can assure you that we also at SEESOX are very proud of the collaboration and what it's achieved over the years. And I'd like to thank you and Jacqueline as well for your extraordinary generosity over the years. It's been a tremendous partnership. Right, turning to the subject matter today, Michael, you kindly reminded us of the title and what we were going to cover. In my little rewrite of the title, I was going to say, sort of after Turkey's elections and the outstanding victory by Erdogan, but also the need for a second round. And I think both of those tell a little part of the story, which we're going to look at today. Yeah. Right, and because of our past collaboration, it's very easy to be a chair because there's a warmth, there's a nice atmosphere, there's a good environment, and also it's easy for me as chair because all three of our speakers have spoken here before, that they're repeat offenders, if you like. So you know them and they know you, so that makes it very easy. Turning to the three, and in order, we have Mehmet Karli, who is co-ordinator of the Programme on Contemporary Turkey at St Antony's and co-investigator of the Migration Diplomacy and Turkey-EU Relations Research Project within the framework of the Oxford-Berlin Research Partnership. He teaches international law, international economic law, international trade and investment, and international human rights law. He is also a practicing lawyer, focusing mainly on the resolution of international disputes and the application of international law. Then we're very lucky to have Dr. Başak Kale, who is the founder and director of the ethics and privacy compliance consultancy company, Ethica UK Consultancy, which is based in London. She's also an associate professor of international relations at the Middle East Technical University, Ankara, and she is coordinator of the migration research program of the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence for European Study. In addition to these positions, she's also an independent ethics expert working for the European Commission at the Ethics and Research Integrity Sector, DG Research and Innovation. And she's a specialist on European integration. And then we have, third speaker is Othon Anastasakis, who's director of SEESOX and also currently the director of the European Studies Centre at the University of Oxford, a senior research fellow at St Antony's, and obviously all the accompanying work and professorships that go with that. Those, of course, are the highlights of these careers. Fuller details are available on the programmes, so you can learn even more about these excellent people and excellent speakers. Right, Mehmet, who will speak first, will cover domestic politics, the economy, etc. Başak will talk about relations with the EU, etc. And Othon will look more at the regional issues, including Greek-Turkish relations. They each of them have 15 minutes. We shall then have a Q&A session, both people in the room asking questions, people on screen asking questions as well, if those come pouring in. And our strict time for concluding this part of the proceedings is 12 noon. So, Memo, take us away.
Thank you very much, David, for this kind introduction, and thank you to Lord Lothian and to Jacqueline for organizing this event and for inviting us again. And this is actually the very first day of festive season in Turkey. It's the first day of Kurban Bayramı, Eid al-Adha. To all those of you who celebrate this, happy, just Eid. And, just on that, just very festive day, I have been given the not so festive task of describing the defeat of Turkish opposition. What a delight. Yes, I mean, let's start just with the first question. What happened on the 14th of May and the 28th of May? Was it a defeat for the opposition? No question mark. I mean, we've been having coffee just right before this talk. Nathan, a dear friend of ours, and his very, very first question when he saw me, how could you lose this, guys? And that's really the question, just to be asked to the opposition. Yes, there is rampant, not only was, there is rampant inflation in the country since 2022. The cost of living crisis is certainly much worse than you are experiencing here in the UK. There was an earthquake, just after which the government failed to provide even the basic amenities and aid and assistance, just for a large part of the population. And there is always, of course, the fatigue of the government that has been in place since 2002, AKP government. And despite all these factors, the opposition did not manage to win the elections. No matter just what type of excuses they come up with, it smells, it sounds like a defeat. It is a defeat. What happened actually is when we examine the trend of votes between vote shares between the Erdogan camp and the opposition camp, is that Erdogan managed to maintain the so-called 52% to 48% balance between the governing coalition and the opposition coalition. Actually, when we take a look at the 2014 and 2018 presidential elections, the balance between the opposition and Erdogan was 52 to 48%. In 2017 referendum for the constitutional amendments, it was again 52 to 48%. The same voting share permeated, and it was the same here in 2023. The difference is, for the opposition, in those elections, in 2014 and in 2018 presidential elections, it was 48% for various names for the opposition, and the elections did not go into the runoff. This time, the elections for the first time went into the runoff, and the opposition managed to consolidate that 48% for the very first time for the candidacy of a single name. Of course, was it enough? It was not enough, and it was nonetheless a defeat. The second, of course, natural question is why? What went wrong? Why did opposition lose? I've got 6 just reasons to explain this. The first and foremost is something that you all know very well. These elections were not fair. I mean, they were not fair at all. This is something that we know very well. The entire mainstream media is controlled by the government and government's cronies. Of course, the public broadcasting company is strictly controlled by the government, and still 84% of Turkish public opinion they get their news primarily from television stations. And to give you a point of, benchmark, the public broadcaster dedicated only 50 minutes for the opposition and 50 hours for the governing coalition. It's just one of those examples. Even private channels were even worse, those controlled by the cronies of the government, and they continued to pump even deep fake videos of the opposition, and it worked out well. Not only this, of course, the entire governmental machinery worked for the AKP, because right now we've got the fusion or the osmosis of the party and the state, and all senior governmental officials, they actively campaigned for the Erdogan regime. Not only that, as government just had those means, it got even foreign aid for these elections. As you know, Turkey is going through a liquidity crisis, a balance of payments crisis, and in the lead up to the elections, Turkey managed to get liquidity assistance from certain Gulf states and Russia, and government used that. This is what I call strongman international, and they supported each other actively. And again, not only that, the fourth arm in the panoply of Erdogan is whenever he sees a real threat to his power, a real contender to his throne, if you will, he eliminates that by using all sorts of means. The first example of this was Selahattin Demirtas, the leader of the Kurdish opposition party. He is a charismatic leader, and Erdogan holds him responsible for the loss of parliamentary majority in June 2015 elections. And surprise, surprise, since then he has been in prison. For the last 5.5 years, Selahattin Demirtas is in prison. And the second contender that Erdogan has spotted was the mayor of Istanbul, Mr. Ekrem İmamoğlu. He's the one who won Istanbul, who got Istanbul out of Erdogan's hands in 2019. And again, surprise, surprise, after a sham trial, he was convicted of insulting a public official, and he got sentenced to 2 years of imprisonment, which also carries along a ban from politics. That decision has not been finalized. That was only the decision of the court of first instance, but of course it became a Damocles sword over the top of his head, and that impaired them, that just undermined his chances to run for the presidency. Yes, that's the first reason. The elections were not fair. But of course, we knew that they were not going to be fair. It's not a surprise. We knew very well that that was going to be the situation. And the unfortunate reality for Turkey is Turkey could have actually become a good case where we could show even authoritarian governments could be toppled through democratic elections. But now Turkey is on the way of becoming an example of authoritarian entrenchment, mainly because of the mistakes of the opposition. If the opposition had not done perhaps half of the mistakes that I will try to share with you, we could have changed the course of the things. The main mistake of the opposition, and of course that's the second reason in my list of 6 reasons, is the wrong candidate. The opposition came up with Mr. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, who is the chairman of the main opposition party, Republican People's Party, the main secular party in Turkey. He is a conciliation figure. He is a convening type. He actually managed to put together a large coalition of opposition parties, and that is a great success, but he's not a charismatic leader. He's not just made for strongman politics. And the polls showed us that had the mayor of Istanbul or mayor of Ankara, 2 politicians who actually won against Erdogan's candidates back in 2019, had they run just for presidency, they would have had more chances. But the opposition did not put them forward. The opposition was so self-confident that they were going to win in any way. They came up just with the name of Mr. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, and of course with the benefit of hindsight, we now see that he was not the right candidate. The third reason is opposition in the lead up to the elections has lost the support of center-right Turkish nationalists. Turkey is a center-right country. Turkey is a conservative polity. And Turkish nationalists, in one way or another, they're at the backbone of the system. Of course, there's much attention for Islamism in Turkey, but even Islamism in Turkey is quite Turkish nationalist. Turkish nationalism is at the heart of Turkish politics. And the opposition in the lead up to the elections, they have lost the support of the Turkish nationalists. It has occurred in 2 main ways. The first one is the opposition had the support of the Kurds. And when you have the support of the Kurds, it bears a risk that you may lose the support of the Turkish nationalists. I'm saying it bears a risk because it's not inevitable. The opposition could have choreographed that much better. They did that in 2019 local elections, because in 2019 local elections, opposition has won all major cities, and they managed to form a coalition of Turkish nationalists plus the Kurds. And they did the choreography much better. But here in this case, they were so self-confident that they didn't contemplate as much on the choreography. Yes, the Kurdish political party was not officially a part of the opposition coalition. They thought that this would be enough to dispel any attacks on that point. But the Kurds, they did not field their own presidential candidate. They had a discussion about it internally, but they eventually decided not to field a candidate, and they decided to support outright Mr. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. And that has been used, abused, manipulated widely by Erdogan, putting just the opposition just side by PKK, the Kurdish separatist, of course, terrorist organization, and that is equivalent of ISIS for much of the Turkish public opinion, and that has worked, of course, negatively for the opposition. Had the Kurds fielded their own candidate in the first round, and had they then yielded their support before the runoff for the main opposition candidate, the outcome could have been different. The second reason why the opposition has lost the support of the Turkish nationalists is the lack of motivation of the second largest party in the opposition coalition, the so-called İYİ Party, or the Good Party. We've got really funny party names, I have to admit. And they are a Turkish nationalist, secular Turkish nationalist party. They are the second largest party in the opposition coalition, but they wanted always either the Istanbul mayor or Ankara mayor to be the candidate, but their wishes have in a way been discarded, and that has caused lack of motivation, lack of incentives for their rank and file to fight in these elections. The fourth reason why the opposition lost is that the spin-offs, AKP spin-offs, the quote-unquote defectors from the AKP, the former prime minister and former minister of foreign affairs, Ahmet Davutoğlu's party, and the former minister of economy, Ali Babacan's party, and the predecessor of AKP, the traditional Islamist Felicity Party, those three center-right Islamist parties, they underperformed. They were part of the opposition coalition. The idea was that they could eat into the AKP's vote share. That would be a double win, loss of AKP, gain of the opposition. But what we see is that they underperformed. How do we understand that? They entered into the parliamentary elections in CHP's, Republican People Party's ticket, and Republican People Party got 25%. And that is its traditional voting share. The Republican People's Party has been getting 25% for as long as I could remember, for the last 20 years. That's why we can see that they did not bring in much votes. And actually, that makes us to say that the so-called Erdogan right-wing firewall of 52% has been protected. This is the term of our colleague Karabekir Akkoyunlu uses, the great Erdogan firewall that protects the center-right votes. They could not make a crack in that. The fifth reason why the opposition has underperformed is that they overestimated the importance of the economic crisis. Of course, economy is important. As you know, it's all about economy, but there is another story as well. Yes, Turkey is going through an economic crisis. Yes, there was rampant inflation, but first, the inflation was much worse in 2022, and in 2023, because of the basis effects, it has relatively gone down, and it has made the customers, the clients, the voters to think that perhaps the worst is already gone. And the second important thing is the government's strategy of delaying the worst of the economic crisis has worked out, because they kept interest rates lower, they kept pumping liquidity into the market. That in turn meant that the economy continued to generate jobs. Yes, economic crisis is a game changer when there's unemployment. When the economy stops creating jobs, it becomes a game changer. But what we see is in 2019, actually, there was unemployment, there was a rise in unemployment, the opposition won all the major cities. But this time, the government has learned its lesson. They kept delaying the economic crisis, perhaps making it even much bigger. Now we are seeing it, we're going to live through that. But they continued to create jobs, and that certainly mitigated the impact of the economic crisis. This is something the opposition has just downplayed. And the sixth and the last reason is the opposition thought that they could win these elections simply through campaigning during the campaign period. In authoritarian regimes, in systems where you got the osmosis of party and the state, it doesn't work like that. They underestimated the tools that the government could use against them. First, of course, the government can gag them, silence them during the campaign period. This is what government did by overcrowding just the space, the narrative. The second most important thing is AKP has 12 million party members. I mean, AKP received 27 million votes, and they've got 12 million party voters. I mean, in terms of the party membership, they ranked 5th globally after the likes of Chinese Communist Party, etc. I mean, this is a state party, party state, where party has really very important networks and grassroots ties. And for a lot of the lower middle class members that make up the, of course, greatest majority of the party membership, they run the fear that, okay, if we lose, we may lose all the perks that we get from the government. And the opposition has, just has not thought through this very much in detail. And finally, I mean, if we've got, 3-4 minutes left, what now for the opposition? Unfortunately, the picture is sort of grim for Turkey's democracy. I mean, you don't have to support the opposition, but I believe we all support Turkish, we all want to support Turkish democracy in one way or another, and the picture is not just that bright. What will most probably happen is there will be an entrenchment of strongman politics in Turkey. This is the so-called authoritarian consolidation. Based on the cabinet of Erdogan, there were some hopes among some people that, there might be perhaps a détente, and the opposition, the government might start taking some democratization steps. I don't think it's going to happen. All the signs are out there that it's not going to happen because, as I told you, the economic crisis had been delayed. Now it started striking even more forcefully. Turkish lira has devalued by almost 30% since the elections. And of course, the automatic response of authoritarian regimes in such cases is to become more authoritarian. Only this week, a prominent journalist has again been jailed in Turkey. I believe this will only increase in the short term. Second thing, there will be a turmoil for the foreseeable future within the main opposition party, Republican People's Party. As you can guess, there are quite a few people who ask for the resignation of Mr. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, who had been in that position since 2010. The only major win for him was in 2019 local elections. And there is not a much veiled challenge against him from the mayor of Istanbul. But of course, mayor of Istanbul always with that Damocles' sword of a potential finalization of a decision against him and him being banned from politics. The opposition alliance the main parties of opposition alliance will probably part ways. CHP, Good Party, and the Kurds. The Good Party had its annual meeting on the last week. There, the leader of the party, Meral Akşener, gave an important speech, and we could see the signs that they may not enter into the local elections as part of the opposition alliance. The Kurds give similar signs because they actually underperformed in the parliamentary elections because they usually get 10, 11, 12%, and this time they got 9%, and a lot of people within the Kurdish political party, they see as the main reason their over-alliance with the opposition alliance, and they may part ways. And if this happens, that will be even a worse disaster for Turkish opposition because the watershed moment comes in the spring of next year, 2024. There will be municipal elections, and if CHP, Good Party, and Kurds, if they field separate candidates, it's highly likely that they're going to lose most of the major urban centers in Turkey. They now control almost all of them. Istanbul, Ankara, Izmir, Adana, Mersin, they are all controlled by the main opposition. But if they do not find a way to continue their alliance, which is very much at risk, which is very much at jeopardy right now, they may lose all of them, and that would only accelerate the entrenchment of authoritarian rule in Turkey. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for getting us off to such an excellent start. Başak, over to you.
Thank you, Mehmet. I think it will be challenging to talk after Mehmet, after all this quite comprehensive kind of analysis in domestic politics, opposition, the current state, and what is next. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the relations with the EU and the impact and how it is seen, both from outside, from inside, and also the relations that has become a bit more transactional. About right now, like 8 years ago, just 100 or 200 meters from here, I was sitting in a coffee shop with the UKIP press representative and making an interview about EU, UK, and I remember him saying that definitely there should be Brexit and there's no way around it. Immigrants are flooding the country. At that time it was on the news. We were literally next to a newsstand. And for me, that kind of idea was a bit too radical. And for the cool-headed, usual UK parliamentary scene, I thought there's no way that this is ever going to come true. I thought that he was an eccentric, he has his own views, and it has to be contained in a certain, radical opinion. I was wrong. As we all know, that most people were wrong. We have realized that over the time, not only in UK, but also in Turkey, the radical views basically shaped the politics. And this was the case with Turkey as well. Last year, I was, I think, on the screen here, and we were talking about the Victory Party. Zafer Partisi, and Ümit Özdağ, who actually worked for a bit together. And their candidate, Sinan Oğan, actually became the kingmaker. He was the kingmaker of this election. Migration, refugee politics became the major component that swung the votes from who's going to win these elections, with all those things that Mehmet pointed out being correct and true. But at the end of the day, that 5% of the votes that Sinan Oğan got in the first round of election basically created the king that we're seeing today. So I will look into that a little bit further for you. What does that mean? Why immigration and refugees became a very critical and important topic. It became an important topic in terms of swinging votes because we have 4.1 million Syrian refugees under temporary protection in Turkey, plus another 500,000 non-Syrians who are either under protection or they are seeking asylum in Turkey. But the numbers are probably slightly higher than 4.1 million because over the years there has also been births and the birth rate is slightly higher for the Syrian population in Turkey. So we can rightly assume something about 4.5 million to 5 million non-Turkish people under temporary or permanent protection in Turkey. So that 5 million has been considered to be a fact, a phenomena, and it was welcomed for a long period of time. But as the crisis in Syria has continued to exist, as the economic crisis hit the ordinary Turkish person, and as certain issues become much more visible, and also the naturalization process has not been very transparent and very democratically discussed within the Turkish political and social circles, it was also inevitable that we see more of an anti-refugee, anti-immigrant sentiments growing, not only from the national circles, but also from the more middle ground, center-left, center-right voters, that it become an issue. It become an issue in the local elections. That's one of the reasons why also it's been argued that AKP and Erdogan has lost votes and lost most of the major cities, because right now in Turkey, we see the refugees and immigrants not in the refugee camps or as in other countries in the Middle East, like in the case of Lebanon or in the case of Jordan, but they live in metropolitan areas. So it's the local governments basically dealing with the needs of the refugees. And there has not been an integration process that is done at the state level. What happened is that the local governments suddenly increasing their population for another 500,000 will have to use their resources to be able to provide services for those newcomers. It was an inevitable thing that they had to do. And in certain cities, such as in Kilis, for example, in the southeast border of Turkey, which is bordering Syria, the population doubled. And this population doubling, meaning that you have to have the same resources and you have to provide services, the doubled amount of the population. As you can imagine, this has risen the anti-refugee, anti-immigrant sentiments. While this is happening on the local level, the EU has provided, as we all perfectly know, the Turkey-EU deal in 2016. The Turkey-EU deal has various components that I'm not going to go into detail because this is not our topic. But what was important for the EU-Turkey deal was that the financial aspect of things, which under FRIT, the money will go to directly to the refugees through international organizations and also to civil society organizations. But it also had a component for the host community. We call the refugee community and the host community. The host community aspect was that, well, okay, we will increase the border controls in the benefit of the EU, both at the sea border, which is the Greece-Turkey border, sea border, and we've seen recently, by the way, the catastrophic events that happened very recently, and also the land border between Syria and Turkey. Syria-Turkey border was an open border from the beginning when Ahmet Davutoğlu was the Minister of Foreign Affairs and later on he became the Prime Minister. It was a part of his foreign policy aspect that let's open the borders, let's welcome all these refugees into Turkey. But suddenly you can see the shift drastically happening in 5 years from an open border policy building one of the longest border walls in the world. More than 900 kilometers of a border wall has now been built between Turkey and Syria, and this is extending in gradual levels to Iraq and Iranian borders. So keep this in mind, that shift. We sometimes talk about how the EU cannot impact the foreign policies of other countries. Well, with the Turkey-EU statement, it was very successful in impacting certain domestic policies of Turkey and shifting the whole rhetoric of opening borders, welcoming everyone, to a border wall built that we've seen in the US-Mexican border. So that shift, that securitization of migration policy, as we say it, has become very apparent in Turkey. And it was also in line with also the domestic needs of security during that time, because the 2015-2016, it is the time that we see lots of terrorist attacks in Turkey, killing lots of innocent Turkish people, and it also there has been an outrage. So it was also backed up with this kind of domestic support, that it was not necessarily was unwelcomed that this was going to happen. So the other aspect I'm going to talk about is the visa liberalization. So that was something positive that was supposed to happen. But with the 2016 July, the coup attempt, it was put on the shelf. And the deterioration of the Turkey-EU relations for in the next couple of years, which meant there's a halt of Turkey relations in 2019. So all these aspects was supposed to be positive in the sense for Turkey's reopening of accession chapters, the modernization of Turkey's customs union with the EU. All these positive aspects that will be helping the host community, supporting basically the borders of the EU, was not realized. So there is an incredible amount of resentment from the Turkish Western-minded elite people that EU did not deliver what it has promised. There is no visa liberalization and there is no hope for a visa liberalization. Recently, I attended a talk with the European Policy Center, and one of the program leaders was basically saying that it is basically the Turkey's problem and Turkey's Western elite's problem that Erdogan is continuing to stay in power. It is not the EU that needs to go and save Turkey's democracy. It is your responsibility. So this is an interesting take on the usual EU's responsibility of being a normative power, supporting democracy and democratization, Copenhagen criteria. So there has been a loss of legitimacy from the EU's end that we have to keep in mind. So it is not surprising in that regard to see that Zafer Partisi or the Victory Party or Sinan Oğan becoming the kingmaker, because they were able to radicalize the politics to swing the votes into both directions that become more radical and more, in that sense, apparent and loud and out there. And it became the refugees, the number of 4.5 million or 4.1 million, or Kılıçdaroğlu mentions that 10 million. I would like to know the statistics behind the 10 million. Or Sinan Oğan says it is 13 million. I would also like to know about the 13 million statistical backup. But at the end of the day, they become instrumentalized. And I think it is fair to say that in the elections coming up, they're going to become more instrumentalized. So next year, we will be able to see more, in that sense, radical racist rhetoric on every political party imaginable, apart from HDP probably, the Kurdish party. But apart from that, we will see more and more loud discussions about this. And on top of that, I would also want to mention something which is critical and important, and I think it has been undermined and quite surprised everybody, the issue of earthquake, the impact of the issue of earthquake in Turkey. It is very difficult to understand it, I think, staying here and looking back to Turkey. But when you're in Turkey, you suddenly realize that the devastation is quite huge. It is estimated that it's about 100 billion US dollars of loss. I think it is even bigger than that because we're talking about the region basically collapsed. I mean, Mehmet has lost also relatives. And you know everybody, you know somebody that probably lost somebody. This is the extent of the loss in Turkey. So there is an emotional loss, social, political loss, and there is also an issue that relates to infrastructure. That region was a region that hosted refugees in Turkey, and already, as I mentioned earlier in my talk, that there was already certain restraints on the local governments, on the local communities, and imagine now that you have a drastic loss and the factories are no longer there. Either working formally or informally is no longer possible. And there's also an internal displaced population problem in Turkey where lots of people left the region. If you have the means, you left the region and go somewhere else and settled. It's estimated 500,000 people from the region settled in Ankara right now. There's a housing crisis that's going on. So all these things in the background, we can imagine that it is going to be very problematic in the next couple of months or years that the region has to be built, and also not only host the refugees, but all the Turkish population as well. So the all arguments about that from both sides, that's the discussion we have seen, that most of the refugees will be returned back to Syria, and that's the whole point of the discussion when it comes to the government as well. That's why there has been efforts to support the northern part of Syria to make sure that it will be possible to support the northern part of Syria, that some of the population will be returned back. Although this is not the willingness of the Syrian population, there is a tiny little minority who might consider going back to Syria voluntarily if the situation in Syria changes, which means that if there's going to be a regime change, we know that there's not going to be a regime change in Syria in the near future. So there is already a very small population who will be willing to return back. With this certain earthquake conditions, I doubt that there will be even any chance of anybody returning back on the northern part of Syria. So when I say all these points and looking back to the EU relations and how it's going to be in the future, we can see that I think the EU has had a relief that that basically Kılıçdaroğlu didn't win, because the evil we know is better than the evil we don't know. At least we have a transactional relationship. Well, it is a bit confrontational. It's like a couple who fight all the time, but at the end they make up and they find a way to continue being together. And they thought that this was a relationship that works for everyone, especially the Ukrainian war is still in the horizon, and Ukraine is trying to become a member state of the EU. This is an issue that will basically halt the enlargement process. So this is kind of a relief that Turkey doesn't join, Ukraine doesn't join. And this is a solution that right now for the EU, it is solving many problems. Is it temporary? It is temporary. Is it a strategic move? It's not a strategic move. Is it short-sighted? It is absolutely short-sighted, because it's not an either-or situation. Just because Ukrainian war and Ukraine is in the picture doesn't mean that Turkey is no longer in the picture. My time is up. I will. Okay.
Concluding sentence.
My concluding sentence is basically taking into consideration of all the geopolitical issues. We can see that right now EU has all the issues in his hand that it is trying to deal with, but still Turkey is an ally that needs to be cooperated and collaborated. Thank you.
Başak, thank you very much indeed for taking us through some very interesting points on EU-Turkish relations and putting the whole thing in context. And you've got us started on some regional issues. So, Othon, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, David. And let me thank Lord Lothian and Jacqueline for organizing this fabulous event. And as I told Lord Lothian before, we at SEESOX are always so excited when we have this kind of event, especially at the end of our academic year as well, to celebrate. I will expand a little bit on Başak's EU-Western Turkey relations, and I will speak a little bit in the end about Greek-Turkey relations as well, which is a topic that we at SEESOX have a lot developed since our inception and creation in 2002. Now, you don't need me to tell you what a big dilemma Turkey is for Europe. Turkey itself is polarized, as we saw from the electoral results and the whole history of the Erdogan era, but at the same time, Europe is also divided on how to engage with Turkey. Does it have to be critical, or will it continue to be business as usual? Should it be concerned with democracy and human rights and democratic erosion, the rule of law? Or should it proceed with areas of cooperation as if nothing is happening? Should it be hard and adopt sanctions and hard conditionality to punish Turkey? Or should it be softer in order not to allow Turkey to drift on the other side, namely Russia? And how about the opposition? How should the West engage with the opposition? Should it engage, but then it doesn't want to alienate the powerful current presidency? And how to deal also with President Erdogan's outburst as well is another example. Respond or ignore and move on. So we are having a two-faced Turkey here in the eyes of Europe, but at the same time, of course, Europe is the mirror image of Turkey as well. So Turkey is a significant other, but it's also part of the Western community as well. It is a cultural bridge with Islamic country, but also with its own religious agenda and identity. In between continents, in between great powers, regionally autonomous, but at the same time a member of NATO, and increasingly anti-EU, yet nominally an accession country. Now, let me say a bit about that EU approach towards Turkey, which is very interesting for me. And I think that there are three particular things that I would point out about the European Union's approach. The first one, transactionalism. Başak mentioned it. I can speak a little bit more about this. The second element is hypocrisy. The third one is short-termism. These are not necessarily negative. These are what they are. And I'm going to expand a little bit on how I see them. So transactionalism, relations between Europe and Turkey have been actually the definition of transactionalism, the ideal type in the Weberian sense. Others call it pragmatism. Others call it realpolitik. Others also see it as the defeat of Europe's normative power to agree on some common rules and procedures defined by the EU context and to manage the relation with Turkey. It's about establishing a relationship on the areas that are workable and they are practical, where there are win-win prospects, and then you avoid touching the more sensitive issues. This is, of course, a policy which is amenable to ups and downs in the relations, and we've seen that in the Western Turkish relations. The West will work together with Turkey. We will continue to see that in the field of security, where there are common interests, while at the same time accepting a closeness of Turkey with Russia or the intrusions in northern Syria. Emphasis here, of course, will be on the accession of Sweden into NATO. We are going to see the continuations of trade relations. Indeed, this is a very, very deepened relationship. There's a customs union. They might want to, in a positive set agenda, continue towards a free trade agreement, but Turkey is very, very big as a market for the European Union to ignore. So what does that mean? Maybe forget about human rights, about rule of law conditionality, and so on and so forth. in the field of energy, Turkey is particularly important. This is now the land that connects Europe with Asia. With Ukraine broken completely, Turkey becomes much more significant in this field. And of course, the field of migration that Başak touched so eloquently, and I'm so happy that we work together with Başak on this particular issue. That has been a very, very pivotal tool of foreign policy. I'm not going to say any more about this. Let me move to the second point, which is about hypocrisy. And that thing is this degree of hypocrisy, as long as it is necessary for the conduct of realpolitik and for the sake of stabilitocracy from an EU perspective. And more specifically, while the EU accession process is frozen since 2018, where the EU suspended accession negotiations, there is a reluctance to end this formally without a viable alternative, for fear that it would alienate Turkey and create an anti-Western sentiment in Turkish society, but also in European societies where a lot of Turks live in Germany, Austria, and other countries. As a result, the EU is pretending to have a process which is simply on pause, yet issuing annual reports and monitoring the accession areas, and the Turkish government, on the other hand, pretending to want to join at some point and criticizing the EU for not giving Turkey its full chances to do so. Does this mean that the EU will abandon completely its normative side with Turkey on the continuing erosion of human rights, the limitation to academic freedom? We are particularly sensitive of this point, as we can understand, media freedom, or the otherization of the LGBT community. As we've seen in the Grand National Assembly, more nationalistic but also socially conservative parties are dominating the scene. Then what we will probably be seeing as well is even more Turkish emigration, brain drain, and other Turkish people that want to come to the more liberal Europe to live. So the European Commission will continue to be critical in its annual reports, so will the Parliament, but what the impact will be of that? Most probably nothing. EU conditionality at its lowest kind of point in order to be able to achieve some kind of compliance. But of course, remember, compliance is a word that Erdogan doesn't like at all. He more likes that kind of give and take, and also it denotes Western hegemony, which is something that, again, Erdogan doesn't like at all. Migration will continue to be a very important issue, and the EU will be using its big purse to address this issue with Turkey. So hypocrisy is this kind of second element, and some even argued, Başak has just did, that this is also very convenient for the European Union because it will not have to deal with the issue of Turkey's accession, and given that neither many member states of the European Union really want this, but also neither Erdogan and his government really want this. So we've got that kind of element of hypocrisy. The third thing is the short-termism and the lack of strategy. This is connected with the other two, but what we are seeing here is that the EU either cannot or does not want to devise a long-term strategy with Turkey. Had it done that, that would have entailed, of course, to deal with the issue of the accession of Turkey into the European Union. So it is taking basically to short terms and ad hoc and a step-by-step approach. It will prioritize the 7 billion in financial aid to help Turkey's recovery from the earthquake. It will give more billions to continue this outsourcing of migration management, which is, by the way, becoming also a model of emulation to do with other countries as well, including Tunisia. And while from an Erdogan perspective he will be getting the money, he will also be criticizing the European Union for not proceeding with visa liberalization and so on. And also through NATO, we try to convince about Sweden and the entry, and of course the efforts to safeguard the UN-backed Black Sea grain deal, where Turkey has been so important in facilitating this. But of course, the longer-term problems will continue to remain in the relationship. The big issue of what Turkey is doing with Russia will continue. It's interesting to note that one of the first people that called Putin during the latest Prigozhin kind of, a putsch or whatever, or almost putsch. It was that Erdogan called in order to, first of all, declare that he's on the side of Putin, and most probably, I assume, also to give some advice on how to deal with the issue, having his own kind of experience with Gulen. So what is new in this third period of Erdogan? One thing, of course, is the issue of economy, because this will be a very big priority. Mehmet already said the state, we don't even know the state of the condition and the negative condition at the moment, but it will be very much in the priority of Erdogan in dealing with this. Foreign policy and economy will be closely tied. And we have seen with the appointment of the foreign minister, but also the minister of the economy, they are both pragmatic. They give the right message to the West that they want to continue with cooperation. The question, of course, is definitely there, the European Union has a leverage over Turkey. The economy is a very, very strong card. But at the same time, we've seen, especially during also the pre-electoral times, how Turkey used the funds from other neighboring countries. Does this mean that Erdogan will try to wean off from that kind of Western dependency in the economy and try to then make himself and the country dependent on even more difficult and authoritarian countries? That is something that remains to be seen. And the second new variable is that this is the third and we think probably the final presidency of Erdogan. But is that the thing? I mean, how do we approach this? If Erdogan, on the one hand, will he try to reinvent, his presidency or his role in Turkey in whatever else for after that? Or will he try to kind of manage his own kind of legacy and see what he's going to be, during these years? And let me finish with a note on Greek-Turkish relations, because it is an interesting thing to see, I think. Following a very tense period during the last 4 or 5 years. You must have read all that has been happening between the two. The earthquake has been once again a critical juncture in the relations between the two countries. So much so that now the two countries are in a state of calm. There are no Turkish overflights over the Aegean. Nothing is reported in the media on that. There is no inflammatory rhetoric. There is the intention to build a positive agenda between the two. Erdogan and Mitsotakis have agreed to meet in Vilnius in the context of the NATO summit to discuss the content of this positive agenda. Even recently, the two defense ministries cooperated in the land border of Evros, where there's another wall that is being built. And they cooperate when refugees and economic migrants try to go from the Turkish side to the Greek side via the river. So we have to see how this is going to pan out in terms of that intention to cooperate and build a positive agenda. Both countries had elections at the same time, Both governments now, they have different foreign ministers to work with, so we've got different people that are going to work to build this positive agenda. The problems have not been solved. There's a number of them. There's no need for me to mention them now. But what I believe, and we at SEESOX also believe, is that the recent rapprochement that has happened, by the way, Greek-Turkish relations throughout the decades have been cycles on ups and downs, detente and competition. But the recent rapprochement did manage to build relations and closeness at levels, at the economic, for instance, or civil society level. And in that sense, there is a kind of a know-how there that can really help this effort to bring the two countries together. So I would like, I mean, it has been impressive how quickly Greece reacted to the earthquake disaster, and also how quickly Turkey also acknowledged this kind of help that came from Greece. And maybe then Greece, if we want to be optimistic, I want to finish with this kind of optimistic note, is a step ahead of the rest of Europe in terms of building this kind of positive agenda that so much Europe also needs to build with Turkey and vice versa.
Othon, thank you very much. And interesting points on Greece-Turkey. And thank you for building on the points made by Başak and Mehmet. Now, we have half an hour left for the Q&A session, and then 5 minutes to draw things to a conclusion by 12 noon. If you're in this room and asking a question, you'll have the pleasure of having Jacqueline bringing a microphone to you so that we can all hear it and they can be recorded. And Jacqueline will keep an eye on the screen as to whether any questions are coming in. Sir, so there's a question here at the front and then a question there at the back. Jacqueline, just here.
Ali Bahajub, North-South Publications. I was wondering why the US, UK and the European Union were against the re-election of Erdogan. Second, if I may, the migration and refugees is a sore subject between Turkey and the European Union. Will that still be the case in the short term? And thirdly, if I may, there is a problem of North Cyprus. The Erdogan last week mentioned that it should be recognized as an independent state. What's your plan on that? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Are you happy to do the first and you the second?
Yeah. Makes sense.
Walter, I'm a former Conservative Member of Parliament. I'm also a dual British-Turkish national. So to Mehmet and Başak, İbayramlar. Can I really pick up on a point that Mehmet made about the AK Party and its 12 million members? Of which I think at least 5 million are women, devout conservative women. And that kind of grassroots organization, as I know, having been involved in elections in this country for nearly the last 60 years, that kind of grassroots organization is critical in elections, particularly when you don't have access to the mainstream media. If you can get your message across on the ground. Is there any sign, I mean, over the years I've heard members of the Republican People's Party talk about this issue, but is there any sign that they are addressing that issue, particularly across Eastern Anatolia? But my specific question, maybe it's to Mehmet or maybe to both, is given his performance in the election as mayor of Istanbul, if İmamoğlu had been the candidate, would he have been elected?
Right, thank you very much for those. The first question, sort of three questions really. Mehmet, if you would like to address the first part, with great pleasure. Başak the second, and Othon the third on North Cyprus. And I think the second question, again, falls mainly to you, Mehmet, but please.
Of course. I mean, when it comes to the US and EU's support for the opposition, I mean, I believe, just I just sort of disagree with the premise of the question. I mean, I'm not sure, just whether, just the US and the EU were actually on the side of the opposition. They remained silent, but for all the reasons Başak has cited, actually quite a lot of the just players, key decision makers, both in the US and the EU, they actually just prayed for Erdogan victory, especially just after the opposition's promises regarding the refugees. Erdogan was better the evil that you know. That's why, yes, of course, on democratic grounds. I mean, Erdogan is quite a whimsical leader. I mean, he is prone to making surprises. I mean, he is not in the words of Macron, I mean, it's not easy to deal with him. It's sort of a nightmarish thing, just when you have to have telephone calls with him. For all those reasons, perhaps on a personal and emotional level, a lot of them did not want him to win. But when thinking rationally, there's a lot of them saw that their interest lies with the continuation of Erdogan's power. And there was no sign whatsoever of any concrete support of the EU and the US for the opposition. I mean, had they supported the opposition, whether it would have been in the profit of the opposition, that's another question. The opposition would probably not have wanted that as well. That's for sure. The civil society in the US and the EU, they were on the side of the opposition, especially pro-democracy civil society, which makes only sense, understandably. But for decision makers, I would put a question mark over there. I believe a lot of them, just breathed a sigh of relief after Erdogan's victory.
Thanks so much, Başak.
Yeah, I think that was one point that I was trying to explain as well, that was not the case. Like the EU was not on the side of the opposition. I think that was pretty clear for various reasons, as I mentioned, and then Mehmet mentioned as well. They definitely were not openly supporting. Normally you would keep your distance, it's understandable, but I think this is keeping the distance a bit way too far. I think that was the problem. Going back to the question, what is going to happen with the refugees and the migrants, and do we see that this issue is going to come up? It's already on the agenda. It's one of the very few issues that actually the EU and the Turkey could talk about, collaborate about. This is one issue, they will definitely work on it. And it's going to be transactional, which is not something that I personally, a person who believes in the European integration process, believes in the benefits of it, not only for Turkey, but usually for the whole continent, will make it very positive for Turkey, because Turkey is still in the EU accession process, whether it is being frozen, but it is literally, in a technical sense, from a legal point of view, Turkey is a candidate country to the EU. And unfortunately, with the 2016 statement, we always talk about Europeanization of Turkish politics or Europeanization of other politics. But what happened with the 2016 statement is that we see a Turkification of the EU politics. It became a grand bazaar carpet sale. Like, you give me this, I get you this, you don't give me this, then I'm going to do this, I'm going to open the borders, I'm not going to open the borders. This is not European politics. This is a very Turkish, if you go to Istanbul, you think that you're getting an amazing deal. There's no way I can tell you that you will get an amazing deal in the covered market while buying a carpet. So this became the level of relationship with Turkey, moving away from normative principles, moving away from the EU acquis communautaire, and this is quite sad, not for the Turkey-EU relations, it is very sad for the legitimacy of the EU.
Othon.
Thank you. Let me just say something about Europe wanting or not wanting. It was evident, of course, in the press and among many public intellectuals that there was a clear preference for the opposition in the West because it was deemed to be much more pro-Western. The governments, as Mehmet and Başak said, they intentionally stayed silent because obviously they didn't want to repeat the mistakes of 2016. And at the same time, they had to be very, very cautious, especially in countries like Germany, where there's a very big Turkish diaspora there, and you really do not want to excite the Turkish diaspora by taking sides in the election. For me, it's interesting that the majority of the diasporas voted for Erdogan. that of course shows, that fairness of the electoral process that that Mehmet was talking about, but it is a fact. So then turning to the second one on Cyprus, which is of course a very, very big issue. There are people here in the room as well, like Lord Hani here, or David as well, having been High Commissioner there. To begin with, the fact that Turkey doesn't recognize the Republic of Cyprus is a very, very big problem in the EU-Turkey relationship. That's not, something that I'm kind of discovering here. But on the issue, and of course, Erdogan can justify this by saying that during the Annan plan, Turkey was very much in favor of the unification of the island. It was mostly the Greek Cypriots that had the problem. Now, in terms of northern Cyprus, during the last 2 or 3 years, Turkey is trying to change, the status quo in terms of recognizing 2 different states. And at the same time making some moves like, in the city of Varosha, opening there and using some buildings. It is upsetting the waters when the UN is still, and the international community is still in the, in the frame of a solution in a federal, bi-zonal, bi-communal Cyprus. What is my now personal opinion? This is totally personal, okay? I think that Erdogan would prefer a confederation. He wouldn't even like an independent Northern Republic of Cyprus, because that probably could become too independent, and it would also have, a kind of orientation towards Europe too much. A confederation might be much more convenient for Erdogan to keep on controlling the northern part of the island, because the Eastern Mediterranean is such, a very important kind of area for Turkey. So I'm not so much believing those 2 independent states in Cyprus. I fear, of course, that this continues in this kind of, non-solved situation. And having also spoken with Greek Cypriots as well, they do feel, or the majority, that they did well in terms of not accepting the Annan plan, because Turkey is just so powerful and so interventionist in the north of the island that they would have lost their kind of, sovereignty. So, that's my kind of, brief, but it's such a complicated matter, of course, that,
Indeed,
yeah.
indeed.
That's why we call the Cyprus problem, when something is not solvable in our life, we say this is the Cyprus problem.
Thank you very much for the questions, Paul. I'll try to answer them briefly. Let me start with the second one, İmamoğlu. Of course, I mean, this is not, social scientific, what I'm going to say. But that's the beauty of being a lawyer. Just we're not scientists, right? And I believe, just he would have won. I believe he would have won for two basic reasons. First, just what were the weaknesses, just Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. First, the fact that, as I've just tried to explain, he got punched on the Turkish nationalism card. It would have been much more difficult for Ekrem İmamoğlu to be punched on that, just issue, because he's coming from the Black Sea region of Turkey, from Trabzon. He's coming from a, just conservative Turkish background. Whereas, as you know, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu is coming from Tunceli, Dersim. He is actually originally Kurdish and Alawite. And that's why it would have been much more difficult to punch İmamoğlu on that issue. The second thing related to that is, of course, I'm embarrassed to talk about this. It goes to the personal identity of Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu, but he's Alawite, and this is a religious minority in Turkey, more akin to Shiaism. And that was an issue that was used against him, because that's a rift within the Turkish society that has a history of 1,000 years, almost. And İmamoğlu, just could hardly be, just punched on that issue. He is Sunni. He's coming from a, just a conservative family, and for God's sake, his surname is İmamoğlu. It's like Papadopoulos, son of Imam. Therefore, and just of course, he is a winner. He has won in the past. That such impetus is also important in politics. Kılıçdaroğlu has never been seen as a winner, but he is a winner. He showed that, and he's got an executive track record to show. For all these reasons, and the difference, I mean, frankly, of course, just we are here to talk about the failures of the Turkish opposition, but we have to give credit to Turkish opposition. I mean, it has been 22 years that they have been performing under very difficult conditions, under authoritarian rule. I mean, some of them just go to jail. Some of them are still in jail, but they nonetheless managed to get 25 million votes, 48%. I mean, just take a look at the US. They lived 4 years under Trump. And just almost half of the Democrats just had to go to therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, think about that. I mean, after 22 years, we're still alive. I don't know if we are normal or not. We certainly need therapy, that's for sure. But there is that resilience of the opposition, and therefore, under the leadership of a type like İmamoğlu, I believe there could have been a victory. When it comes to the membership issue, yes, the Turkish opposition has drawn those lessons, but it has been really painfully slow. The current membership of Republican People's Party poll is 1.2 million. Again, I mean, for all those of you who can compare this to British politics, it's huge. I mean, CHP is a huge machine as well. And when you compare it, I mean, being a Turkish citizen, I'm quite sure, Paul, you would remember Deniz Baykal times, the predecessor of Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. Anyone could hardly get into the headquarters of the political party. It was such a tightly kept political organization. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu has changed that. But that change has been all too slow. And there is a consensus amongst all those who challenge his leadership that this change needs to accelerate. Yes, that lesson has been drawn, but of course the question is, can they find the right person to implement those lessons?
Thank you very much. Right, we have 2 questions, now 3 in the room. Jacqueline, keeping you busy, can you come to the right to the front? Donald, if you go first, and then one there, and then we'll have one at the back.
Thank you. The effect of the election on NATO and Turkey. One of our newspapers had a headline in relation to the Turkish president, Putin's man in NATO. How unfair is that? And is the result positive or negative for Sweden and NATO? Does Turkey expect to extract any more concessions from Sweden?
Thank you very much for that. Having had that question, NATO and Turkey, there's a question on the screen which you might also like to take into account when answering Donald's question. Right, question from there.
Hello, thank you, Paul Reynolds. There are 2 arguments that I've heard within the Foreign Ministry about post-election economic optimism, and one is to do with relations with Central Asia and China and Western China as a vehicle for Chinese investment in Turkey, and the other is the hydrocarbon sector, especially because now we've got the 2 pipelines, one coming from Russia, one from Azerbaijan, possibly being extended to kind of friendly countries, Serbia, Hungary, and so on. Are these views kind of realistic as grounds for optimism and investment, or is it just trying to tick boxes?
And Jacqueline, there's a question from the back there. We're keeping you busy, I'm afraid.
It's good, getting those steps in.
The prison road is a belt.
Thanks, Jacqueline. My name is John Dobson. I'm a visiting fellow in geopolitics at the University of Plymouth. I also work as a journalist. On the latter, I wrote a few articles for my newspaper, the Indian Sunday Guardian, prior to the elections, when I talked about a sort of Putinesque flavour to what I saw. I'm not an expert in Turkey, but I've written several pieces about it. Putinesque flavour to what was going on. In other words, both men, as we heard, of course, employ the same tactics to get elected. They dominate the press completely, and they also lock up the opposition. But of course, there's also discussion about the health of these 2 men, which I find interesting. And certainly we had a little flavour of what would happen to Russia after Putin in the shenanigans of last Saturday. But turning to Turkey, I understand Erdogan is not a well man. Maybe you have inside knowledge on that. Maybe he's extremely well, I don't know. Maybe you could comment on that. But certainly what will happen when he meets his maker? Will Turkey break down into infighting and maybe a bit of civil war, as could well happen in Russia? Or will it be a nice, stable democracy and hand seamlessly to a successor? Thank you.
Thank you. Very nice question. So I think we have two sort of chunks there. One is NATO and Turkey. Perhaps Othon, if you and Başak would like to tackle those. And Memo, I think you're the man for Erdogan and Putin.
Okay.
But you can think of it. Othon, do you want to lead off?
Yeah. Can I start with the Erdogan and Putin? Because I think it's a very, very interesting comparison.
Yeah.
And whenever I see these two together, I mean, obviously they also show that they have a liking for each other. It's like Putin is the harder version, and then Erdogan is the softer version of their authoritarianisms. And I'm sure that they are also getting, they're doing interesting parallels there, and Erdogan would like to see, and do a lot of what Putin is doing, and vice versa. What is interesting is the immediate reaction to what happened in Russia, which is completely different from what happened to Turkey. That's why when I mentioned he might have given lessons, it is in the medium and the longer term, because what we saw Putin do is mostly appease, not go with punishment, try to be as calm as possible, even congratulate those who were planning to do the putsch for not doing it in the end, which is, of course, the completely different of what was done in the case of Turkey, where there was an immediate reaction. Possibly there is a difference, of course, with the fact that Erdogan had a lot of people in the streets, actually. He managed to get a lot of them to support him, and there was that kind of popular legitimacy. As for NATO, the next immediate step is to get Sweden in NATO, and this is where the West is really, really working hard in order to be able to manage this. Sweden may be taking some steps towards addressing the concerns of Turkey, but at the same time, Turkey is not feeling that this is good enough. And of course, because the judicial system in Sweden is much more independent than what it is in Turkey, this is something that, there are limits as to how far Sweden can go with the Kurds. This is a similar thing with what happened in Greece when there was those officers that went to Greece. And again, when Erdogan was, demanding for them, but there was a whole judicial system that actually, was deciding on their fate. So I would expect that in the end, like with Finland, Erdogan will agree to get Sweden, but of course he will insist to do armed deals with the United States and other countries. That probably will be the return.
Okay. I think I will add a couple of points in regards to NATO. Like, Turkey is a NATO member country. Turkey has been contributing to NATO quite drastically in the last, decades or so, like starting from the Korean War, etc. Turkey is creating a public good, not only for Europe, but also for the transatlantic alliance. I think questioning for what happened in the last couple of years that regards to Turkey and whether or not Turkey's membership is absolute is unquestionable. I mean, I will be very strong about this because we have to go back and see what has Turkey contributed and what is the alternative. That we should not be even discussing this, I think. And there are certain valid points that Turkey raises as well, and I don't want to sound like a government representative here, but I'm talking from a much more wider perspective that the alternative doesn't exist for Europe. I think we have to agree on that. Whether this is handled well diplomatically is a different question, I think. But Turkey has had some rough patches with going back to the US question as well recently. As a NATO member, Turkey has been denied for certain deals, and then Turkey had to look for alternatives. It was in a way that was a problematic situation on both sides. And I don't necessarily think that it was diplomatically dealt well, because unfortunate leaders happened for the US side as well. We had to deal with very conservative governments on the US side. So that created all these tensions. So going back to the NATO question, I think absolutely Turkey's role cannot be deniable. With Sweden, I think it has to be dealt, serious concerns, as Othon mentioned, is there. And it has to be dealt diplomatically, but the discussion should not go any deeper, I think. And Turkey's role is very important. Any other questions that regards here for me?
No, yeah. I think on to the memo.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. I mean, let me start with the NATO question as well. One additional factor to all those, is, in addition to the ones that Othon and Başak has mentioned, I believe there will be a positive outcome for Sweden's membership into NATO, not necessarily perhaps in the immediate short term, but in midterm. One of the main reasons for that is we've got a new Minister of Foreign Affairs, Hakan Fidan, who used to be the head of national intelligence, and the head of the national intelligence now is the former spokesperson for Erdogan, Ibrahim Kalin. Those two people known to be relatively more rationalist, and now with Hakan Fidan at the helm, I believe the institutional influence of the Minister of Foreign Affairs over foreign policy making will increase, which will positively feed into the decision to eventually support Sweden's membership into NATO. It will take time, just because there needs to be the right choreography for Erdogan, just to present to Turkish public opinion that it has gotten something in response to that. Yes, the judiciary works slowly, as Othon has said, but I believe more importantly than that, as he has pointed out, an F-16 deal, or there's a sort of an armament deal between the US and Turkey, a sort of public support for Erdogan in a critical juncture will just lead Turkey to support Sweden's membership into NATO. Yes, you see the Putin's man just around that table. I mean, not 100%. Turkey has that strategic autonomy in its relationship with Russia, but he's certainly very close and intimate with Putin than any NATO leader would have liked Turkey to be. But Turkey is not the only one. I mean, you've got Hungary around the table as well. I mean, you've got other, just pro Putin states out there, and Turkey is not, unfortunately, the only one. When it comes to Paul's question regarding economic optimism, Paul, I mean, as you, I believe, implied in your question, it's too good to be true. I mean, yes, because Turkish economy is in dire need of cash injection, not mid to long-term investments as in the Belt and Roads Initiative. Because, I mean, the Chinese investments there into infrastructural projects, and China does not want to inject cash into governments, just coffers. But Turkey is going through and will perhaps be in an even a worse state of, balance of payments crisis, where it needs cash injections to meet its just foreign debt obligations. And in order to meet that, right now they are knocking on the Gulf doors again. Only the day before yesterday, the new Minister of Economy was paying a visit to the United Arab Emirates, because these are the countries from which they can get that immediate need of cash if they do not go to the IMF. Of course, this is sort of anathema for him, for Erdogan's leadership. He wouldn't certainly like to be seen as knocking on the door of the IMF, but Turkish economy is sort of forcing his hand. But all those type of optimisms, grounds for optimisms, are not baked, let me put it like that. When it comes to the Putinesque flavor, yes, there is certainly a Putinesque flavor. There is actually amazing literature on that, right? Dictators' learning curve. I mean, they all learn from each other. I mean, in order to stay on the right side of law in Turkey, this is what I call strongman international. For strongman, just you pick any other word that you want to use that. But there is a critical difference between Putin and Turkey, Putin and Erdogan. Turkey does not have natural resources that Russia has. And that is a great boon for Turkish Democrats, for Turkey's opposition. If Erdogan had the richness of oil, the richness of natural gas in his hand, we wouldn't have been talking about Turkish opposition at all right now. It would have been all dead. It would have been long gone. But Turkey is not a natural resource-based economy. We don't have the black curse. Turkey needs to have a vibrant private sector, and that creates a different dynamic in Turkey. In terms of his health, yeah, we have seen just footage where he was frail, and where just he did not naturally look as a healthy person. Of course, I mean, whatever I would say would be Kremlinology, because there is not, it's all opaque, just we don't know anything about his health situation. What we know is that he has epilepsy. This is a fact. He has epilepsy because once, I mean, it was almost 15 years ago, he had an epileptic attack. And just he had been taken to hospital, and his bodyguards, just in a hyper-professional way, locked him up in the car. And in order to take him out of the car, they had to smash, just the windows of an armored car. That took some time, and therefore, we know that he has epilepsy. We also sort of know, with a large degree of certainty, that he suffered from, bowel cancer, but he suffered from that, just at some point back in the past. And these things might affect his health going forward, but again, there is no just transparency. We're not in a position to say anything. Would Turkey just fall into a civil war? Or no, Turkey would not fall into a civil war. I mean, Turkish security apparatus is just quite strong, and Turkish society is not armed. I mean, in order for there to be a civil war, there needs to be widespread just armament just within the society. Turkey is not there, but there would be war of succession. I mean, in Logan Roy style. I mean, that would certainly be, just a succession wars. Who are the just immediate candidates? His two sons-in-law, Selçuk Bayraktar, who produces those drones, and Berat, just Albayrak, who used to be the Minister of Economy. These are the two sons-in-law, just who are, just contenders to throne, or the current head of national intelligence, Ibrahim Kalın, or Hakan Fidan. Those are the four figures who are out there as potential replacements. But of course, one thing is for sure, after Erdogan, AKP cannot stand or stay and remain as one unified party. There are so many fractions within AKP who are held together solely by the personal power of Erdogan. Therefore, once he passes away at one point in time, I do not think AKP would remain as one single political force. There would be various, just parts that it would, that would spin off out of it.
Thank you, Memo. I love the thought of Strongman International. I think that's quite an organisation. Right, we have time for one more question, if there's one in the room.
There is one, I think. The BRIC state question. Maybe I can answer.
Okay, super. Excellent.
The BRIC states. This has been a long discussion. This is not something new. We completed the project, the EU-based project. Oxford was also a partner a couple of years ago. And this was the question, where does Turkey fit at that time? And at that time, we're talking about 2015, 2000 up until 2018, there was hope for a soft power of Turkey, soft power of Russia. But by the time we write the EU project, it's always the case, by the time we finish, things change very rapidly and quickly. So the soft power has deteriorated, and we suddenly realize that the BRIC states, as the norm suggests, does not necessarily share too many issues that will bring them together under one group. And that includes Turkey and Russia. Despite the similarities, there are various differences. There are certain similarities of certain elements of authoritarianism, but they don't necessarily come together as a group when we compare Brazil to Russia, to China, to India. They're totally separated and different. So I don't necessarily think that Turkey could fit into another group within this case of BRICS. I will cite my PhD student at that time making a comparison between the role of Putin versus Erdogan, and at the end we come to the conclusion that there is a willingness to support a strong leader in countries like Turkey and Russia. There is a similarity, but not necessarily there are so many elements that we can come up with a kind of a recipe for those kind of roles, or in terms of the regional power of these countries run by authoritarian leaders that will come. They will bring us to a conclusion that there are the shared values. The values will be, I think, that will separate the BRIC states versus other Western alliances.
Thank you, Başak.
One last sentence to follow up on, just what Başak has just said. I mean, perhaps, I'm the eternal optimist, and one reason to remain optimist. Sometimes, just in an Orientalist fashion, a lot of people in the West tend to downplay the democratic tradition in Turkey. But let's not forget, going back to Ottoman Empire, Turkey has been organizing elections for almost 150 years. Turkey organized its first multi-party elections in 1946, and from 1950 onwards, governments changed peacefully in Turkey through elections 9 times. I mean, there is that democratic tradition in Turkey. Yes, it has been going through very difficult circumstances, but the resilience that the Turkish opposition has demonstrated over the last 20 years, despite all these failures, despite continuous failures, I believe in the midterm is source for optimism. That's something that we have to keep in mind. That's a distinction between Russia and Turkey, a very important distinction.
If I may ask, if I might add as well, going back to the question of 1.2 million CHP registered voters, one has to also remember the young population of Turkey. The amount of people who are willing and has connections with the West, has embraced certain values, and they are well more connected than any other peers around the world. I think one has to also not underestimate that population that is willing to push Turkey into a different era. They may not be registered, but doesn't mean that they're not organized. Never underestimate the power of the youth. And you probably see right now in London about 100,000 Turkish people migrated to this country. It's a loss for Turkey, but there's a huge brain drain, but doesn't mean that they're no longer part of the Turkish politics. They're still connected. They're still integrated in various ways. So we also have to keep that in mind as well. So no civil war. I absolutely don't think. It's impossible.
Well, thank you very much. And we've not only used up our time, but we've made excellent use of it. And I have 3 thank yous. One is to our 3 excellent speakers, not only for producing such good contributions, but also keeping so excellently to time. So thank you very much. And then engaging in an extraordinarily rich debate about what's going on. Really interesting. And thank you, the audience, for asking the questions that produced such a rich array of answers. And thank you, Lord Lothian and Jacqueline. Thank you as ever. Marvellous.
Just endorse what David has said about this excellent seminar this morning and about our panelists. I would, however, like to thank one other person, and that's David himself, for chairing this morning so excellently. And thank you all for coming.